All right, let's jump right in. We're about to unravel a fascinating medical detective story, one where a single, classic symptom sent doctors down a total rabbit hole and forced them to rethink a textbook diagnosis.
So, this is really the heart of our explainer today. It's a puzzle that shows you how even the most well-known signs in medicine can sometimes be incredible imposters. So, let's set the scene. Our story starts, like so many do in the world of infectious diseases, with a traveler who comes home with a very, very strange symptom.
Now, get this. Our patient is actually a doctor herself, a surgical resident, so she knows her way around a hospital. She's just gotten back from this incredible adventure holiday. Hiking in jungles, wading through rivers, sleeping in huts. Basically, the perfect backdrop for picking up some kind of tropical bug. About a week after she gets back, it starts. Some pain on the side of her face, a noticeable lump on her scalp, and this is the big one, this really dramatic one-sided swelling of her left eyelid. It's so swollen, she can barely open it. Now, for the doctors looking at her, that swollen eyelid was like a giant flashing neon sign pointing to one thing in particular. All right, so based on where she'd been and that telltale eye swelling, the medical team had a prime suspect locked and loaded. And here it is, Romana's sign. Now, this isn't just any old swelling. We're talking about a hallmark symptom, a classic sign that doctors are literally trained to spot. When they see this in a patient who's been to Latin America, their brain immediately screams Chagas disease. So, Chagas disease comes from this tiny microscopic parasite called Trypanosoma cruzi. It's not a virus, it's not a bacteria, it's a protozoan, and it has a really specific way of getting into the human body. And the way you get it is, well, it's pretty wild. See, it's not the bite of the so-called kissing bug that actually infects you. The bug bites you, usually on the face while you're sleeping, and then it poops right next to the bite. The parasite is in the feces. The infection only happens when you, in your sleep, instinctively scratch or rub the bite and smear that infected poop into the wound or, you guessed it, into your eye. And listen, don't think for a second this is some super rare, obscure disease. The CDC figures that around 8 million people worldwide are infected with Chagas, and a lot of them have no idea. That's why recognizing these early signs is so important. Chagas disease basically plays out in two acts. First, you've got the acute phase, right after you get infected. It can be super mild, maybe a little fever, some aches, or that classic swollen eyelid. But then comes the chronic phase. For years, even decades, it can be silent. But then it can cause devastating, life-threatening damage to the heart or your digestive system. Catching it early is absolutely critical. So, let's recap. We've got a patient from the right part of the world with the classic sign of acute Chagas. It really seems like an open and shut case, doesn't it? But, in medicine, you always gotta wait for the lab results. And this, right here, is where our medical mystery takes a very, very sharp turn. Because every single test they ran for that Chagas parasite came back negative. Not just once, but again and again. They looked at blood smears, they ran cultures, they did advanced PCR tests. Nothing. Romana's sign was there, but the parasite was not. The prime suspect was innocent. So if it wasn't Chagas, what on earth was causing the swelling? Well, the answer finally came about a month later when the patient, remember she's a surgeon, decided to investigate that lump on her own scalp. And what she found was not an infection, but a living creature, a human botfly larva. Yeah, you heard that right. The medical term for this whole situation is myiasis, which is basically a fancy way of saying an infestation of your tissue by fly larvae. The culprit was the human botfly, and it had made a little home for itself in her scalp, causing a huge inflammatory reaction that spread down to her face and mimicked Romana's sign perfectly. And the way this thing gets into you is, wow, it is some next-level sci-fi horror stuff. The female botfly doesn't lay her eggs on you. Nope, too easy. Instead, she literally catches a mosquito in midair, glues her eggs to its belly, and then lets it go. Later, when that mosquito bites a person, their body heat causes the eggs to hatch, and the tiny botfly larva drops down and burrows into the fresh mosquito bite. So, okay, a seriously bizarre diagnosis, but what's the big picture here? Why does this one weird case study matter so much to doctors and anyone studying medicine? Well, this case is the perfect example of just how tricky differential diagnosis can be. Look at this. A swollen eyelid isn't unique to Chagas.
This botfly infestation even has its own name now, a pseudo-Romana sign. But other things like the African eyeworm or even roundworms from trichinolysis can cause similar symptoms. Doctors have to think way beyond the most obvious answer.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The actual published medical report on this case sums it up perfectly. It's basically a direct warning to the entire medical community. Hey, don't get tunnel vision, even when all the signs seem to point one way. Exposure to a kissing bug is a risk for sure, but so is getting bitten by a mosquito.
And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. Diagnosis isn't just about matching one symptom to one disease. It's an investigation. It's about being a detective, following the evidence from the labs, and being ready for the unexpected. Because sometimes the most obvious answer is just a very, very clever mimic. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? This story was all about one classic sign. It just makes you wonder, how many other textbook symptoms, those things doctors learn to recognize instantly, have their own surprising imposters just waiting to be discovered?